Hey everybody, you are now watching Fun with Fallen Flags episode 19. So episode 19 is actually a continuation of episode 5. Episode 5 was the construction of the trestle at Ophir, Colorado, and it was a Rio Grande Southern trestle. However, it's just the wood construction. So in that video, if you remember, and if you haven't, jump out and go check it out. But if you remember, what we did in that episode was we built one of the vertical supports, the bents, and then once we got a good pattern for that, built a template, we could replicate that. And again, a lot of this stuff in model railroading is really good procedure, and then you replicate that procedure over and over, whether you're laying track, connecting a switch motors, DCC installation. I mean, you learn how to do a process and then you replicate it really, really well. So that's what we did in this episode 5. So we built a bent vertical support of the trestle, and once it was up, we built one and put it next to it, and we did that to 20, I think it was 21 vertical supports. So since the slope of the canyon that this trestle sits in isn't just flat, every single one of those bents changed in height. So the center two deep ones are the two we're concerning ourselves in this episode. So the wood construction of the trestle is built. It's been painted to a color that we found that we liked, and now we're going to put some footers on the very center part of this trestle. So a lot of this episode has to do with mold making and not so much about the trestle. When we're done, what we want is we want a couple of feet on the very center two deepest supports of this trestle. Got it? Simple, right? We got some problems. Problem number one is we don't have any blocks, any stones to build this trestle footer out of. We got to cast those. Problem number two is when we get those blocks cast, we're going to have to construct the footer out of those, block by block, kind of like Legos, putting Lego blocks together. And when we're done with a footer that we like, if we really like it, we're going to go ahead and make a mold out of that so we can replicate those in the future. Because we did all this work, we might as well go ahead and capture it. The problem with the blocks is we don't have any type of blocks. We're going to do all this out of plaster, all this out of hydrocal, it's called. So we need to make some blocks, and we need to make a lot of them, because this is going to take probably, I counted a couple of hundred blocks. So by the time we're done, we're going to cement together several hundred blocks in two supports, and if they come out pretty good, then we're going to go ahead and make a mold of those. So we got to make a mold of the blocks, build the footers, and out of those blocks, capture the footer as a future item that we might cast, and then stick them on the trestle. So if we really like them, we might add more, but I think we're just going to leave the two in the deepest sections. And a lot of the trestles in western Colorado sat on either the ground or maybe a few ties or maybe maybe a rocky area or something like that. But in this section, we're just going to have stones in the center. So let's get started. Okay, this first construction piece is pretty simple. Basically, cut up some lumber, glue it together, paint it, and then test fit it to the base of the trestle. What we're going to do with that flat portion is we're going to place the granite blocks that we cast, and we're going to build that up so it appears like it's essentially just a big granite block footer. All right, simple. First step done. Second step, we need granite blocks. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut basswood sections in the exact same shape of the blocks that we want. We're going to put all those in a box. We're going to stick them down in the center, and we're actually going to put them on a piece of duct tape, mount them in rows, build a wood box around it, and then we're going to pour a bunch of RTV rubber in, which is room temperature vulcanizing rubber. And what that means is the rubber cures, turns hard, turns rubbery from a liquid to a rubbery solid at room temperature. Okay, pretty simple. So let's take a look at the box and the mold that we make out of those bricks, and then the first shot of plaster that we'll pour into that. So the mold is essentially composed of a piece of duct tape with the sticky side up, stick the blocks to that, build a wood frame around it, and then super glue the wood frame down to the duct tape. You can use hot glue, but I like to use super glue. So once that's done, we fill the mold full of RTV rubber, let it cure, pop it out, and you get a mold looks like this. So once that's done, we fill the mold full of hydrocal, let it cure, and once we remove the blocks from that mold, you get blocks that look exactly like the wood blocks that we use to create the mold. Pretty simple. Okay, simple. You will make mistakes. There will be material that leaks out from the box, from the mold may set up, the hydrocal may set up sooner than you expect. You know, just throw out the material that you don't like and keep going. Eventually, you're going to have enough blocks that you can start construction, and you can start building the granite blocks on that footer platform. And our goal is to disguise the footer platform so it looks like it's just made out of blocks. So let's take a quick shot at the construction of the first one, what it looks like, and what the two of them look like when they're completely done. And remember, they're a little bit different height, so you're going to see one looks a little recessed and one looks a little popped up a little bit in the center. That's intentional because the heights of the two vents are not the same. I used super glue. You could use white glue, but you're essentially just building bricks up, and I did it 3 courses high, and we're going to do it twice, and then we're going to test fit it to the bottom of the trestle, and if everything looks good, then we have completed our footers for our trestle. Alright, so if that's all you want to do is create the 2 footers for the bottom of the trestle, we're done. I don't believe that I'm gonna do this just this one time. And I like the way the stonework looked when I was finished. So what I want to do now is I want to capture the work that I've done and be able to replicate it by just taking some hydrocal, pouring it into a mold, waiting for it to cure, popping it out, and I have an exact copy of all that work I just did. So we're not done. We're going to make another mold, but now we have different masters. We're not going to use the bricks. What we're going to do is we're going to use the 2 footers that we just created. So real quick, put the footers in a box, pour RTV rubber into that box, let it cure, break the box open, and pull the RTV away from the footers. So real quick, I'll show you a couple of pictures of how we're going to do that. Also, once you start doing this, you start realizing that there's other options. That footer, it may actually work as a smaller footer if you were to cut it in half. And since you've got a sharp cut on one side, taking of a hydrocal casting, taking your razor blade, dental tool. I like to use the backside of a X-Acto knife, back part of the point, and carve out some brick lines on it, round it, make sure it looks exactly like the brick lines do, and you end up having a half length footer. So now you've got another item, and if you really like what that looks like, you can cast another mold. So you can see that this gets really addictive because you're not sure if you're done. All you know is you don't want to have to go back and continue to make these pieces by hand from scratch if you can start casting these things. So mold making is almost kind of like an addiction because you're never really quite sure. These walls, I noticed that I liked the way the brickwork looked, and I lined a couple up in a box, and it started looking like a foundation of a building so that I could actually cast these, put it as a foundation, build a wooden structure on top of it, an older structure, and it looks like it's actually a foundation. Do miter joints at the corners, make sure the plaster lines up. You can put a little more hydrocal in there to make sure everything matches. So I'm looking at the molds that I'd created, and my son wanders by and says, Dad, those would look really good in bocage country for your miniatures, your micro armor, and your your 28 millimeter war game stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it would. I mean, you just look at it from a fresh viewpoint and you're gonna see. So anyway, off the soapbox, I'm gonna just let you guys see the next mold making process for the footers that I went through, and you can see those real quick. Okay, so we're going to use the exact same process as before. Cut up some wood, build a box, put the masters in the box, put some RTV in there. Now, you want to use some sort of release agent. I didn't, but you really ought to. That way, when the rubber goes into the box, it's going to release. Otherwise, you may have an integral part of the mold that doesn't come out. I was fortunate, it wasn't a problem. So the plaster castings came out great, and then I kind of got addicted, because this is sort of an addicting process, and I started making a whole bunch of castings. So again, use some sort of release agent, it's a good idea. On plaster, the rubber's not really going to stick to the plaster that much, and even if it did, I'm more concerned about the mold than the actual master itself, because I'm going to use the mold to cast a lot. As you can tell, I cast a bunch at the end. Also, when I did get the master out of the mold, I pried it out. There was a lot of places where some of the bricks I had spaced out a little bit. There were gaps, so the RTV ran down in between the bricks. So I just looked at the mold when I was done. I took a small pair of scissors and I trimmed a little bit of that so that the gaps between wouldn't be replicated quite so deep. So maybe a 1/16 of an inch or so was plenty. Again, that's just personal preference. If you like those really deep gaps showing up between all the blocks, then the RTV, whatever's going to flow into, and you pull that master out, all of those gaps and recesses, wherever that RTV can flow, it's going to be in your mold. So just be aware. But I did trim mine up a little bit when I was done. And other than that, that's it for mold making for this episode. There was one final thing that we talked about as a step in episode 5. I believe I brought it up. I can't remember for sure. But at the top of the bents, there was some little galvanized pieces of metal. And that was to protect the top of the bents from ashes, cinders, whatever. Because there was more than one occasion the trestle caught fire, burned. So, it's in most instances in the Rio Grande Southern, if a trestle burned down, it shut down that part of the line because that was the only path that it took. There wasn't multiple trestles or ways to go around. Rio Grande Southern was pretty much a straight shot from Ridgeway down to Durango. So trestle went out of commission, the line was out of commission. So um, uh, the metal pieces on the top, I did a couple of things. I took a piece of this material that I had from the previous project I was working on. It's a metallic looking foil paper, and you could probably find stuff in a craft store that would work just as well. You don't have to get anything specific to model railroading, but it's what I had on hand. So I cut it so that it would fit perfectly across the bent and glued it on, folded just a hair down around the top of the bents so it looked like there was a piece of metal over the top of the bent, and then just a little bit of flange. A lot like galvanized material that you have on your house, flashing around the chimney and that type of stuff. If you look at that, it's pretty much identical to that. But what I used was really, really shiny. So I took a flat steel colored paint and just dulled it down. It was almost completely covered with the paint, but you could still tell that it was a little bit of shiny underneath it, which is what I wanted. And then after that, then I replicated that on every single bent that I had. And if there was like 21 bents that I had to do it on both sides. I had to do it 42 times. So this trestle is definitely a very repetitive project. So anyway, long story short, let me show you a real quick picture of that, and you can see in the picture there is a trestle bent that has nothing on it. It's just the bare painted wood, a shiny piece on one side, and then a dull silvery piece that I've painted on the other side. So it's nothing on it, just the shiny, painted. All right, so I hope you could see that. I hope you could see the before, the metallic, and the painted versions. You might have to pause and look at it because I know it's not quite as clear as hopefully that you can see it. But that's it. So I have all the wood built on the trestle. I have the metallic stuff on there. I've got 2 footers in the center, and I think I'm just going to leave it like that. Other than that, just some of those casting ideas. Continue to work on that and practice it, and your skills just get better. And then all your hard work can get replicated, and you can start using those as bridge piers or along the ocean, or just retaining walls or whatever. You don't even have to use both sides of what we created. Then I'm already thinking of things that I can do with house foundations, and any number of things. I even at one point looked at stacking multiple ones of those just to see how they look. So, or turning it into some sort of asset for gaming, which my son, when he walked by, I thought, I just need to think outside the box on this. There's so many things I can do with this. So anyway, I appreciate all of you guys watching this episode. I hope I helped, and if you did get to the end of this episode, I know this is a long one, please let me know. Subscribe to the channel, and let me know what you thought of this episode, if it was useful, if it was too long, if it was not long enough, we need to go into more of the mold. But the whole reason for this episode is for basically feedback from viewers and from Facebook groups that responded positively and just had tons of questions. So I thought, I'm not going to do another episode on either a local railroad here to me in Colorado, or to a another hobby aspect just yet, because I want to answer as many of the questions about mold making as I could. So I do appreciate everybody's feedback. Please subscribe. Let me know if I'm doing great, like, dislike, and click the bell icon if you want updates after you do subscribe. So I appreciate it, and I will see everybody next week. Thanks, you guys.